The Kagatla is silent in the heart of a Botswana village, beneath an open sky that has watched generations come and go. The community gathers for a feast. The air is still, almost sacred, as elders sit in a circle, their presence commanding respect without a word. At the center lies what is known as the Beef King, a slaughtered ox, the symbol of unity, wealth, and shared identity. In this moment, it is more than food. It is history. It is belonging. It is everything. But not everyone reaches forward. A young woman, raised in this same red earth, pauses at the edge of the circle. Her life began here. She was nurtured by these traditions, shaped by the rhythms of cattle, community, and culture. Yet today, something within her has shifted. Quietly, without confrontation, she steps back. She does not reject her people. She is simply choosing a different path. This is where her story, and a much larger one, begins. Botswana, a land where the Kalahari Desert stretches endlessly into the horizon, and the Okavango Delta breathes life into its northern edges, has long been defined by balance. For centuries, its people lived by the philosophy of Botho, a deep sense of humanity, respect, and communal responsibility. Identity here is not individual, it is collective. What one does reflects on all. And yet, beneath this stable surface, change has been unfolding, not through conquest, not through force, but through quiet influence. Islam, a faith originating far beyond these lands, began arriving in Botswana through the movements of traders in the late 1800s. These were not conquerors. They built no empires. They left no grand monuments. Instead, they came with something far less visible, but far more powerful: character, honesty, consistency. In small trading posts scattered across vast, dusty landscapes, these early Muslims lived by their principles. They didn't preach loudly, they didn't demand attention, but over time, their actions spoke louder than any words could. This became what many now describe as silent dawah, a quiet invitation, not through persuasion, but through presence. And in a society built on trust and communal living, this approach slowly began to resonate. Because in Botswana, what you are matters more than what you say. But this raises a deeper question. If a belief begins to take root not through force, but through quiet observation, what happens when it starts to grow within the very people it first encountered? And what does it cost to follow it? In a country where cattle define wealth, where sharing food defines brotherhood, and where belonging defines survival, choosing a path outside tradition is not just a personal decision. It is a transformation of identity itself. And for some, that transformation begins in the most ordinary of moments. A conversation, a question, a realization that something feels different, something that calls them forward. The moment a person chooses a new path in Botswana, the change is not loud, but it is absolute. It begins with something simple, something as ordinary as a meal. In this land, cattle are not just animals, they are currency, identity, and legacy. A herd represents a man's standing in society, his ability to marry, to provide, to belong. Meat is shared communally, prepared according to long-standing tradition, and offered as a symbol of unity. To refuse it is not just to decline food, it is to stand apart. For those who embrace Islam, this creates an immediate and constant tension. Halal, meaning lawful and permissible, becomes more than a dietary rule. It becomes a daily test of conviction. In many rural areas, there are no certified slaughterhouses, no structured supply chains, no community infrastructure designed to support this way of life.
So every meal becomes a decision. Every gathering becomes a quiet negotiation between faith and belonging. And this is where the true challenge begins, because in Botswana, belonging is everything. To belong is to exist. To be part of the community is to be recognized, accepted, and supported. But to deviate, even slightly, is to risk isolation. Not always through conflict, but often through distance. Conversations become shorter, invitations become fewer. Silence begins to take shape where connection once lived. For some, this isolation becomes the hardest part of the journey. There are few masajid across the vast stretches of the country. In many places, there is no call to prayer echoing through the air, no large gatherings filling the nights of Ramadan, no established systems to guide the daily rhythm of worship. Faith becomes something internal, something personal, something carried quietly. A person may pray alone in a room, under a tree, or in the stillness of a rural home. There is no audience, no reinforcement, no guarantee that anyone else nearby understands. And yet, the prayer continues. Because this path is not built on comfort, it is built on conviction. But that conviction does not come without cost. There is the pressure of family, generations tied to shared beliefs, shared rituals, shared expectations. To choose differently is not always seen as growth. Sometimes it is seen as departure, not just from religion, but from identity itself.
There is also the weight of perception. For decades, Islam in the region was associated largely with foreign communities, traders, migrants, outsiders. So when indigenous Botswana embrace the faith, they sometimes face an unspoken question. Are they becoming something new, or are they leaving something behind? The answer is not simple, because what is happening here is not a replacement, it is a redefinition. And that redefinition is quiet. A student discovers Islam through a conversation. A worker begins to question their routines. A young woman listens, reflects, and chooses, not out of pressure, but out of understanding. And slowly, without headlines or announcements, a pattern begins to emerge. Not in numbers, not in institutions, but in individuals. Each one stepping into the same reality. A path that offers clarity but demands resilience. A path that does not promise ease, but promises meaning. And in the silence of the Kalahari, where the wind carries more dust than sound, these quiet choices begin to echo. Because even in a land shaped by tradition, change does not arrive loudly. It arrives one decision at a time. Across the quiet expanse of Botswana, something subtle is taking shape, something that cannot be measured in numbers alone. Islam in this land does not rise like a wave. It does not announce itself with loud declarations or towering structures. Instead, it spreads in fragments, individual decisions, private moments, and quiet transformations that happen far from the spotlight. There are no vast skylines filled with minarets, no overwhelming presence dominating the landscape, only small, steady signs of change, like footprints in the sand, slowly reshaped by the wind, yet never fully erased. And perhaps that is the point. Because here, belief is not inherited in the same way it once was. It is chosen. And when something is chosen, truly chosen, it carries a different weight, a deeper sense of ownership, a more personal form of truth. For many who embrace Islam in Botswana, the journey begins with searching for clarity in a world that often feels uncertain, searching for structure in a life shaped by tradition but facing modern challenges, searching for something that feels aligned, not necessarily new, but familiar in a different way. In that search, some find that Islam speaks to values they already understand: discipline,
respect, community, charity. A clear connection between the individual and the divine, without layers of confusion or distance.
And in that moment, something shifts, not externally, but internally. A quiet alignment, a sense that this path, though different, resonates with something already present within them. This is what many describe as a symbolic transformation, something that can be understood as the Kalahari Crescent, not a physical landmark, but a representation of a growing reality, a faith forming not through force or expansion, but through resonance and sincerity. And with that realization comes an important truth. This is not a rejection of culture. It is an adaptation within it. Those who follow this path do not leave the land. They do not abandon their roots. They continue to walk the same dusty roads, live among the same cattle, breathe the same dry air that has defined generations before them. But something within has changed. Faith has moved from being inherited to being intentional, and that shift changes everything. Because inherited belief can be followed without question, but chosen belief must be understood, defended, and lived. And that is where its strength lies, in the quiet resilience of individuals who continue forward despite uncertainty, in the child who learns to explain their fast at school, in the family that quietly gathers for prayer in a home far from any mosque, in the moments where no one is watching, but faith is still practiced with sincerity. This is the deeper story of Botswana, not just a story of religion, but a story of identity, of choice, of belonging. And in the end, the land itself seems to reflect this truth. The Kalahari does not rush, it does not force growth, it endures. And in that endurance, something remarkable happens. Life adapts, meaning emerges, and even in the harshest conditions, something new can take root. Because in the end, belief does not need to be loud to be powerful. It does not need numbers to survive. It only needs sincerity, and sometimes that is enough to change everything.